Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here and for tuning in via live webcast. Just 13 months ago, right here in this room, I announced an investigation into billing and customer service problems at Hydro One. At that point, we had more than 600 complaints. In the next 3 days, another 1,500 complaints came in from all over the province. The total soon surpassed any investigation in my office's 40-year history. This week it reached 10,000 complaints, and there are still more every day. We thought this would be an opportunity to bring you up to speed on our investigation. And there are a few reasons why we're here today. First, I want to bring Ontarians up to date on our investigation, which is still going on. My special Ombudsman response team has been digging into the broad systemic problems behind the unprecedented number of unhappy customers. We have started to draft our report, and I plan to release it in the coming months. At that time, I will share with you my findings and recommendations. Second, I want to report on some of the thousands of individual cases we have already resolved. Some of them are frankly shocking. We've seen absurdly high bills and atrocious customer service. We've seen the same astounding errors over and over again. People charge $10,000 or $20,000 at a time. Then what they really owe is closer to $100. Je vais présenter quelques-uns des milliers de cas individuels que nous avons déjà réglés. Plusieurs sont franchement choquants. Nous avons vu des extrêmes de factures ridiculement élevées et de services à la clientèle déplorables. Nous avons vu encore et encore les mêmes erreurs stupéfiantes. Des gens qui recevaient une facture de 10 ou 20 000 $ à la fois, alors que la somme qu'ils devaient était proche d'une centaine de dollars. Many of these horror stories have become success stories after our staff work with Hydro One to bring these bills back to reality. I've released brief summaries of some of these cases today as examples. The third reason, and I think most significant reason, because it is a matter of urgent public interest that really couldn't wait for the publication of a formal report, is what follows. Over the past few months, during one of the coldest winters in memory, Hydro One has been threatening to cut off people's power for unpaid bills. Hydro One promised us it would not cut anyone off, but that's not what it told the people who were calling us in tears, distraught with fear that they and their families would have no power if they didn't pay an outrageous bill. One father of a newborn and a 6-year-old near London called us in panic because Hydro One had sent him a disconnection notice on Valentine's Day. Remember how cold it was then? -21 Celsius. They demanded that he pay more than $3,000 right away. We received almost 100 complaints this winter from people in similar circumstances. Hydro One admitted to us that these notices are just empty threats. They called it a tactic to encourage payment. I think most people would call it something much worse. Hydro One nous a admis que ces avis ne sont que des menaces à la légère. Ils ont dit que c'était une tactique pour encourager le paiement. Je crois que la plupart des gens choisiraient un terme beaucoup plus dur pour en parler. We gave Hydro One a chance to resolve this issue before making it public today. That's normal ombudsman practice. My deputy and I met personally the Chief Executive Officer on February 20th, 19 days ago. I urged him to end the cruel disconnection threats and state publicly that no one will be cut off. I warned them that I would report publicly on this and that my threat was not an empty threat. That was 19 days ago, and the complaints about disconnection threats kept coming in. Finally, yesterday at 4:55 p.m., shortly after the media advisory went out, we received a response from Hydro One saying that they had revised their disconnection letters because of my concerns. The new letter warns people that they might be cut off, quote, depending on weather conditions, unquote. In my view, this is no better. In fact, it's worse. It's an attempt to change the channel to the weather channel. Hydro One has cooperated with us throughout this investigation. I hope we will see more productive response as it draws to a close. Finally, to anyone who's still having problems with Hydro One, we are still taking complaints and we'll do our best to help. And I look forward to sharing my report with you in a few months. Finalement, j'aimerais dire à quiconque a encore des problèmes avec Hydro One que nous recueillons toujours les plaintes et que nous ferons de notre mieux pour les aider. In the meantime, I'm happy to take your questions about the information I've released today.
Monsieur Marin, vous dites que vous recevez encore aujourd'hui des plaintes au sujet de Hydro One, ça fait 13 mois, donc de toute évidence, le problème persiste.
Oui, le problème persiste. C'est vraiment une situation déplorable. Puis on voit qu'après 13 mois, il aurait dû avoir une sensibilisation de la part d'Hydro One des problèmes à la clientèle, du service à la clientèle. Et malheureusement, nous en sommes pas là.
Et les problèmes sont les mêmes?
Les problèmes sont les mêmes. On vous a donné des détails dans notre polycopier d'exemples très précis de situations de plaintes qu'on reçoit tous les jours. I think Hydro One needs first and foremost to recognize that it is a public servant. Cutthroat tactics that may be appropriate in a competitive private sector business are inappropriate for a public sector organization in a monopolistic situation. I've made sure to distribute to you and to table with Parliament the original letter that we took offense to, and that letter is called the disconnection notice. And I would draw your attention to the second paragraph of that notice. If payment is not received by the required payment date, this is a sample, the letter sent to us by a complainant, which has been anonymized. If payment is not received by the required payment date, your electricity service may be disconnected between December 23rd and January 2nd, 2015. So much for Christmas and New Year's Day. We know for a fact that the electricity service would not ever be disconnected because it's against the policy. It's against the undertaking by Hydro One. Yet Hydro One is threatening to cut off electricity in the middle of one of the coldest period of winter. So this is what we brought to the attention of Hydro One on February 20th, saying this must stop. Approximately 19 days later, at 4:55 p.m. yesterday, we received a document called Final Draft, which you have in your possession. Final Draft, disconnection notice is revised to read service interruption. I guess it doesn't sound as scary. If you look to the third paragraph, if payment is not received by required payment date, depending on weather conditions, we may either install a load limiter to limit the flow of electricity to your property or disconnect the service altogether. How is this an improvement? Now we're told that it depends on the weather conditions. So who gets to determine the weather conditions? Is it a Hydro One employee looking out the window? Is it the weather station? Sometimes they have conflicting weather predictions. Which one will you follow? And then, of course, weather predictions are notoriously unpredictable in Canadian winter season. Now, this morning at 10:55 a.m., a final draft is sent to us. It's been distributed to you moments before the beginning of this press conference. This one has been relabeled again, urgent collections notice, and there's a pretty red box that highlights the confusion because the language is the same. Depending on the weather, we may disconnect your electricity or limit the flow. Now, this investigation is all about transparency, accuracy of the billing and customer service process at Hydro One. And 13 months later, is this the best they can do? Some would call these kinds of notices, and I find the last ones to be scarier than the first ones because everyone's going to have to look out the window, determine whether the electricity will be cut off. I mean, all these notices have to say is, we do not suspend electricity services from November 1st to the end of March, which is their policy. We will do so immediately after that period if you don't pay up, if you're not in arrears. Seems Hydro One has a difficulty saying that. And some would think that these notices are fear-mongering, they're bluffing, they're bullying by the state, or some kind of extortion. I think these notices are the case of a public servant lying to the public. This is exactly why citizens lose faith in our public institutions. And that's why it must change. One final point before continuing with your questions is that there have been approximately 75 people who've turned to us about these disconnect notices, but I have no doubt that we're probably talking hundreds, maybe even thousands, but people just get so scared that they simply move out of their house. And we had an example of people who had a young child and they just abandoned their house, moved in with relatives. But these people who are being sent these threatening notices are all too often those who were put under a payment plan because of errors by Hydro in the first place. So people didn't get any bills, then they got a very large bill, let's say $10,000, and they're put on a payment plan. Why? Because Hydro didn't do its job in the first place of sending proper bills. They're put on a payment plan, then they default, then they're asked for the whole amount due in one shot, or you'll be disconnected. So they're kind of caught into, they're like a gerbil in a wheel, and they can't get out of it, in a problem essentially caused by Hydro One.
Much larger than people have seen in the past.
We're looking in a sense of pricing, in a sense of accurate pricing, accurate billing, not in a sense of whether people are paying too much for electricity, which is beyond the ambit of this investigation. But if you look at some of the examples we've given you, some people owe $10,000, and by the time the errors were fixed, the person had a couple $100 credit. I mean, that's a big difference. It's a huge sway in situations. So we're looking at the cost of electricity in a sense that it has to be accurate and reflect the actual usage.
Did they not stop and think for a moment that when they're doing this, that it might be a mistake? Because this is what this is all about. These crazy billing, these crazy billing practices. So they would send these messages out that we're going to cut you off, even knowing that it could possibly be a mistake.
Oh yes, and not only that, but knowing that they would never cut someone off. When we confronted Hydro One with these notices, they said, well, that's a tactic. That's what we do. Well, we're not serious about it. Meanwhile, we have incidents of citizens raiding the local money mart at exorbitant interest rates to get money to pay down Hydro to keep their children warm. We have a case of a citizen who whose family member depended on electricity in order to receive health care. There was machinery that required life and death machinery requiring health care, and they get a notice like that, you're going to be disconnected. You can imagine the impact of that notice.
They called it a hollow threat, and you said some people would call it something else. Is that what you meant by extortion? Is that what they...
As I give examples, I simply call it lying, that Hydro One is lying to the citizens, and that is what often causes people to lose trust in their institutions. Hydro One does not belong to Hydro One. It belongs to the public. And in upholding public trust, you got to tell people the truth.
Hydro One belongs to the public for now. The government's considering some privatization. Whenever anything's privatized, to a certain extent, there's more of a drive for profit. So if this is the way Hydro One acts now to collect its money, do you have any concerns? What kind of concerns might you have if they move towards a privatization of this utility?
Well, in the past, when the government has privatized public services that we oversaw by nature of our mandate, we then lose oversight. And my concern would be if the government proceeded with privatization, that at least give consideration to allowing us to continue having oversight over Hydro One. That would be my concern. The issue of whether or not they should privatize, that is a broad public policy issue which the government has to make a decision on, and I have no comment on it except to say that you should ensure, especially in this sector, that there is proper oversight.
Possibility that this is a sign of a desperate organization. The government has launched an asset review. It wants them to sweat the assets, make as much money as they possibly can, possibly to look good for a partial sale. Do you think there's a possibility that Hydro One is just under so much pressure to make money that they went to tactics that are not usually seen in the public sector?
Well, now that's a very interesting point, that we will be exploring in the final report. When we investigated the lottery system in Ontario, the first sentence in our report was that the Ontario government is addicted to gambling. And we saw that in that report, rampant instances of fraud were let to stand. The head of the OLG was looking the other way, literally said that in a memo, because he didn't want it to affect profits and undermine the system. And so that is very much a theme that we will be exploring in the final report. Right now, today we're making one finding and one recommendation, and it's in respect to these threatening letters, these deceitful threatening letters, because although we're enjoying mild weather these days, not too long ago we were in a very cold weather, and I don't think we're out of the woods. And I think Hydro One needs to come clean and say once and for all to the public, we won't disconnect you, and stop playing these mind games with the public.
When you initially brought forward the fact that you were going to investigate billing practices, there was contrition on the behalf of Hydro One. And that now here you are saying that this is happening. You warned them that you were going to come here and say this, and they still haven't done what you've asked. What does it tell you about the culture there in terms of the way they interact with the public that have to pay the bills?
I think your observation in your preamble is absolutely correct. We saw a lot of activity after the announcement of this investigation, and I was frankly quite surprised to see that this is the best they could do after 20 days. I think this letter is worse than the first one. It's arbitrary. It depends on weather conditions. Are we all supposed to be weathermen? Who are we supposed to rely on to decide, okay, am I going to get electricity today? Let's open the shades and look outside. Which channel am I going to get my weather from? You know, this whole investigation is about openness, accuracy, and transparency in the building process. That's how we announced it 13 months ago. I find it discouraging that, yes, we have to be here today. If this matter had been resolved from February 20th, I wouldn't be here. And just to give you an idea, we had the meeting on February 20th, the CEO of Hydro One and his vice president, and then we called them on February 25th, We spoke to them on February 26th. We exchanged emails with them March 3rd. We sent emails again and called on March 4th. We emailed on March 9th. We spoke to them on the phone March 10th. And this is what we received as a result of that. So it's not as if we had a meeting and we just moved on. We were pressing to see some positive denouement. And had we seen that, I wouldn't be here today. Or perhaps being here simply to update you on numbers.
In the cases that you resolved so far in terms of the overbilling, have you found a common theme? Is it smart meters or math errors?
That you'll have to wait for the final report. It will be part of the final report.
But can you even give us an indication as are you noticing a common problem or common theme at this point?
I can't comment on that at this stage, unfortunately.
Is it fair to say it'll be a damning report?
Let's say there won't be any flowers with it. I'll leave it at that.
If you've had 10,000 complaints, do you have any idea what the figure is in terms of possible number of bills that contain errors?
We'll have a better breakdown in the final report. Again, like we've just started drafting the final report.
Higher than this, though? Like,
Well, yes, it'll be higher for sure. And I mean, reports are still trickling in at a rate. Complaints are still trickling in at a rate of about a dozen a day. Some days up to 16, 17, 18. Other days 5, 6, but at about a dozen a day. And you know, I just hope that a minor issue like this remains unresolved after 20 days, multiple calls and emails. Just come back to Al's question. I would hope that, you know, when we produce the report, I'm not sure how long it's going to be. Let's say it's 100 pages, 150. Let's say it has 20 recommendations. We certainly hope that Hydro One will be better attuned to moving. If something simple like this can't be resolved, it concerns me that we're not in the right frame of mind when the final report issues.
I have one more question. Do they contract out collections to an outside private agency, or do they do it with their own Hydro One staff in billing?
This is the responsibility of Hydro One, these threatening letters. One more question?
A bit more about the reactions of people who received these disconnection notices. Surely they didn't know they were idle threats. What kind of strain, I guess, did that put them under? What did they
It's
tell you?
extreme anxiety. I mean, I responded to an email from, you know, when I've asked my staff when emails come in and people are anxious and whatever, I'm happy to respond to them myself, and I've done a lot of them. And there's an elderly gentleman an elderly lady on a weekend who wrote a 45-page complaint. And the main issue was the anxiety she was suffering, the panic over being cut off electricity. She was a senior, and she was concerned about her husband. And so I responded to her on a Saturday, and I basically said to her, "Don't worry, this is a bluff." And I signed my name. And I sent her the response in an email, and she responded to me saying, "You will never understand how much you have made my day. You will never understand." Like, the level of anxiety was palpable. And, you know, from a simple line, it would diffuse it all. I mean, why play these games? If you're not going to be cutting off electricity, why threaten them? Like I said in the beginning, if you're in a cutthroat public sector, competitive businesses work that way to compete. But this is a monopolistic, publicly owned company which should be acting in the public interest. And now I've shared the big secret with you about the threats being a bluff, and I count on you to repeat it to everybody that you encounter in your newscasts so that people can chill and realize that they won't freeze to death by the electricity being cut out.
On a sort of related note in terms of alleged computer errors, because that's what this was supposedly all about, I'm wondering if you've received any complaints from people related to the mess with the welfare checks over the last couple of months with this new computer system that the government's been putting in.
No doubt, I believe so, that I was brought to speed on that, but I don't have the exact number, but we'd be happy to provide that to you.
10,000, you said, are they all related to Hydro One and their problems, or
Yes,
every last one?
yes.
La lettre en question, est-ce que ça date seulement de cet hiver ou si ça date de plusieurs années? Et puis, vous l'avez
Je
découvert,
pense
ça
que
fait-
la lettre est la même depuis plusieurs années. Ce qui est différent, c'est que le 20 février, on a indiqué à Hydro One qu'il fallait la discontinuer, puis il fallait arrêter de menacer des citoyens avec des coupures de services d'électricité. One last.
A few times that Hydro One's a public agency, but the government is also moving forward with its asset council and plans to, you know, whatever they may be, to privatize. And Hydro One has been singled out as an entity that could have part of it sold, or, you know, have the government's interest diluted in that. Have you noticed Hydro One's responsiveness to your concerns, to concerns from customers, kind of decreasing then as we get closer to the government revealing what its plans might be for the privatization?
I haven't made any such observation. Okay, thanks very much.